It's now a privilege and a pleasure to call on Michael Siegel for a Devar Torah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Howard, thanks for your cogent introduction. And on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for leading the services for all these weeks. It's a tremendous job.
Thank you, Michael. My pleasure, and it's really sweet of you to say that. I appreciate it.
So in today's Parsha Va'etchanan, we learn that Moses will not be allowed to see the good land on the other side of Jordan, the land of Israel, and he should instead give instructions to Joshua for, quote, he shall go across at the head of the people, and he shall allot to them the land that you may only see. While several weeks ago in the Parsha of Pinchas, Moshe accepted God's judgment, in today's Parsha, he pleads with God to allow him to enter the land. The translation of Va'etchanan is, I pled, but God refuses this request. Scholars argue about why Moses was denied the pleasure of seeing his people cross into the land of milk and honey, but the consensus seems to be that the decision was some kind of sanction for transgressions that Moses committed in the past. So it raises the question for me, what kind of leader was Moses? In many ways, he was a great leader. Elie Wiesel, in his Nobel Prize winning book, Messengers of God, puts it this way. It is not simply that he occupies a special place in Jewish tradition. His passion for social justice, his struggle for national liberation, his triumphs and disappointments, his poetic inspiration, his gifts as a strategist, his organizational genius, his complex relationship with God and his people, his requirements and promises, his bursts of anger, his silences, his efforts to reconcile the law with compassion, authority with integrity. No individual anywhere accomplished so much for so many people in so many different domains. His influence is boundless. It reverberates beyond time. Wow, pretty good. But in spite of his greatness and his accomplishments, we know from reading the Torah and from a fascinating book by political scientist Aaron Wadolsky, Moses as a political leader, he was not perfect. Where he was great, he was really great. And there are three major areas of his greatness that resonate today, especially today in 2020. His humility, his selflessness, and his love of teaching and learning. As Howard said, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. When we consider the origins of Moses' leadership, personally chosen by God, we might believe that he was perfect, or at least as perfect as God. And yet, we find a leader facing similar problems to leaders in all times and places, having truly lofty goals, persuading stubborn people to change, and experiencing an absence of resources. On top of all this, Moses suffers doubts about himself, about his abilities, his competence, his strength, his endurance. Jethro has to remind Moses that he could burn out as a leader, similar to what David Gergen told Bill Clinton, you need more sleep. So what does Moses have to offer his people? Surely many of them were aware of the courage Moses had displayed as a young man, his familiarity with Egyptian culture, his belief in God, his pursuit of justice, his selflessness. Certainly Moses had character. But what does he really have to offer them? A vision of freedom, a new land, a moral way of life. How will he get them there? How will he unify a group of former slaves and lead them to a new world? How will he mediate between the ferocious power of absolute law and the frailties of human nature? Yes, they are currently in a condition of slavery, but after all, they have shelter and a predictable life. He offers them uncertainty, potential catastrophe. For his actions lately in Egypt seems to be making things worse. Moses seems to be edging up to one of the worst political formulas that has afflicted leaders throughout history: overpromise, underdeliver. So what can he really offer the Hebrew people? He can offer them the ability to learn and to grow, to fight for freedom and adapt to uncertainty, and to believe in themselves. These may be the greatest gifts Moses can give his people. In this context, let us compare Moses to Pharaoh. Both are essentially competing for the loyalty of the Hebrew people. The language of Pharaoh is frozen, static and settled. Each incident is final and permanent, inscribed, elaborated, and then forgotten. We all remember the great line in Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments: so it shall be written, so it shall be done. There is no hesitation in Pharaoh, no doubt, no error. No matter how frequently he is surprised, Pharaoh does not change his hypothesis about the world, because what he says is true by definition. Who knew that he would be a model of leadership even into the 21st century? And he does not have to consider the preferences of his followers, because he knows his followership is guaranteed. Moses, by contrast, brings a tentative language to the Hebrew people to go with his dynamic view of history. For Moses, truth is no longer established by definition. People have to learn from experience. Moses himself has to learn to lead. Like other leaders, his task is to act, to err, to learn, to persuade, to teach. Moses is simultaneously the formulator and reformulator of Israel's becoming, the eternal editor, so to speak, in whose name his and his people's history is written. It is not by accident that Moses is the first and greatest Jewish author. And one of the greatest things Moses has to teach the Jewish people is the importance of what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. The belief that we can learn and grow, we can change our circumstance, even after living in a predictable lifestyle for many years. Yes, we believe in God, but we also believe in ourselves, in our capacity to learn new things, to change our ideas, to learn from experience. Dweck compares the growth mindset with a fixed mindset. The belief that we have already learned all we are going to learn, that our brain has limits, our lives are set, that we are really not capable of changing too much. George Bernard Shaw once remarked, "The man who thinks he knows everything has started to die." The greatest attribute the Torah applies to Moses, as Howard said earlier, is the title of teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. And what he is teaching the Hebrew people, and by extension, all of us, is that life is about learning and growing, about enthusiastically embracing change with all of its uncertainty, with all of its anxiety, because God has given us the ability to adapt to our environment, to learn new skills, to advance our knowledge. In the words of Carl Jung, "I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Let me conclude by returning to Elie Wiesel, describing Moses' death. And Howard mentioned this also. Nobody was present at his death. Nobody knows where he was buried. And so, in a way, he lives on inside every one of us. For as long as one child of Israel somewhere proclaims his law and his truth, Moses lives on through him, as does the burning bush, which consumes man's heart without consuming his faith. Shabbat Shalom.